Hey, everybody. Welcome to Locker Room. This is Southland's podcast for men, where we redeem men's conversations, try to talk about the right things in the right way. And I have back with me Neil Gregory. And we had great reviews about you, man.
Oh, good.
By that, I mean one buddy of mine texted me. I was like, that was a really good podcast.
You know, I think any review at that point, I'll take that. Any type of good review.
Well,
That's
good.
People
People have this tendency to say, like, everyone thinks the way I think, or that I'm representative of the whole, I'm just going to go ahead and assume my buddy Cliff that emailed me and texted me and said he loved our episode.
It's great.
That he's representative of the whole. And
Thank you, Cliff.
You're a fan favorite.
Cliff and viewers like you.
That's right.
Or listeners
you've surpassed Hatfield and Vandy. And we'll try to get you in here a little more often. We want to knock Hatfield off the
how many? Was it 5 now?
Oh, I don't know.
5 or 6?
He keeps track. I don't keep track.
Oh, geez.
He's got a number in his mind, I'm sure. So
he likes himself on a podcast, I guess.
He does.
Do you think he listens back to it?
I know he does. Because he'll call and be like, "Yeah, man, I listened." Blah blah blah. He listens to all of them, but I think maybe he doesn't not listen when it's him on there.
Sure.
I have to be honest. I really don't listen to these because I've already had the conversation.
I did listen back to ours, and it's funny, I kind of blacked out. Like, sitting here doing this, I'm like in the conversation.
Remember what you said?
I don't remember what I said.
Yeah.
And sometimes I go, why did I say that? And then I went, oh yeah, that was good insight. Well done. But
I thought you did well.
Thank you.
Well, so this is going to be the final episode of this season, and this is the one where we've been taking questions from listeners and then bringing in somebody, and then we bat around the question and maybe get to an answer, that kind of a thing. Yeah. But just a little tease, I think, is what this would be. There will be a bonus episode that's not in line with the theme of this year that will be coming out shortly. So.
Oh, and I don't even know what that is.
Stay tuned, kids. Don't delete the podcast.
That's the only tease. Is there's one more.
There's one more
that's
coming.
Not.
And it'll be
is it a special
soon.
Guest? Can I ask?
Special guests, and it's multiple special guests all at once.
Oh, I'm so intrigued.
But
Zach, do you know who it is?
Lest there be a scheduling, mishap. I don't want to go any further with that, though.
That's fair.
There's still time. Things could get messed up.
Maybe then. It's a maybe tease.
Yeah, it's a hope.
Okay, that's great.
It's on the books, so.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it should be good. All right. So you've picked a question.
I've picked a question.
And I literally don't know what this question is.
You have no idea.
I'm a little jet lagged, tired, been all over the place, so this could be an adventure today.
And if you need me to, I could talk, because I have some feelings about this too.
Good. I like
at least the first half
I like
of
to hear
it.
you talk.
Okay. How do you know you're following Christ and his will for your life? Second part. Sometimes I struggle making a decision, big or little, because I don't want to make a choice that isn't in God's will. ... And this is the second part that like we can talk about this or leave it. Usually struggle with this when trying to decide whether to pursue a girl or not. Which I understand that side of it, but the first half of that.
Yeah, so I always tell people the number one question I get. So now I started ministry in 98, so what is that, 24 years, something like that. The number one question I get is, are you sure I can't have sex with her? Like, are you sure I
really?
can't? Oh, yeah, it's always sexual related. Like, that's always the number one question from people generally speaking. Like, did God really mean, it's a lot like Satan in the garden. Did God really say that you can only have sex with the person you're married to, that kind of thing? Second to that, and probably a close second, is how do I discover God's will for my life?
Yes.
So there's a couple things I would say, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. There's some assumptions built into the question. So one of those assumptions is that God has somehow hidden his will from us.
Yeah.
Like it's a code that has to be cracked, or it's a treasure that has to be discovered, and there's a methodology to finding it out. And I just don't buy into that. So what I often tell people is, hey, you have a couple things. You have God's what we'll call sovereign will. That's what he's going to do regardless of what you do.
Right.
He's God in heaven. He'll do what he wants when he wants. You can't violate that. It's good news. There's nothing you can do.
Off the hook. You're
nothing
good
you
to
can
go.
do to jack that one up. All right. Now, on the other side of there's kind of two rails. So sovereign will, then there's God's moral will.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about God's moral will is he has revealed that to us. Like he's given us those guidelines, those boundaries, and that's found in the Bible.
Yeah.
All right. And in between those two things is where wisdom gets to operate. And some people will call that God's permissive will. So the things that he permits within those two boundaries of his sovereign will and his moral will.
Yeah.
So what I always tell people, and I think Christians get really, really locked up and paralyzed. It's like a paralysis by analysis type thing of trying to discover God's will for your life. I'm like, okay, is there anything about the choices in front of you? Let's say you have 3 choices. Do you remember that show? You're too young, probably. I think it was Let's Make a Deal.
Yeah, no.
Where the goat there'd be like, what's behind door number 1? What's behind door number 2? And then you could trade what you had for what's behind that door. I think
they all like dressed up in costumes.
Yeah,
right?
It was really weird.
Yeah.
And I think, and oftentimes there would be a goat behind one of the doors. So I think people tend to view God's will that way of like, I'm just trying to pick the right door, and this could go really poorly or this could go really badly. But I don't think it's that way at all.
Yeah.
You know, so if you have 3 choices in front of you and none of them violate God's moral will, they can't violate his sovereign will, that's where you're called to operate with wisdom.
Yeah.
We're called to walk as wise, not as unwise. And God gave you a brain, but he also gave you gifts, and he gave you talents, and he gave you desires, and he gave you all kinds of things that you can bring into play to make the decision that's in front of you. So I don't think God's will is as hard to discover, nearly as hard to discover as people tend to assume.
It's not this like mystic, like, oh, if the smoke blows this way slightly, then that means it's this.
And I don't think it's always a choice 1 is God's will and choice 2 is not God's will. I think there's a lot of times God's going, man, my desire for you is that you glorify me and worship me and love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. One of my favorite verses is really said twice in Colossians, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as though working for the Lord and not for men.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, that's a big whatever.
Yeah.
So if your lens is whatever I do, whether I'm however that thing goes, a baker, a candlestick maker, whatever it is I'm doing.
Childhood rhyme.
Right.
Insert here.
Whatever it is that I'm doing, if I'm laying that on the altar before God, going, this is an act of worship for you, I'm going to glorify you in this. Yeah. I think God is way more into who you are than what you do.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Like that line right there. He's more into who you are than what you do. That seems to be the thing that I've had that conversation with. It seems to be more with young people, but that's also like the circle that I'm in. It's just this. I'm so worried it's this. I'm going, hey, are you like a Christ follower? Like, are you? Do you feel like you're following the Lord well? Then make your path, man. Like that's. I have a tattoo on my arm that
he has a tattoo.
Yeah. What's yours? Fire and Ice.
It's grace and truth, man. But there is fire and there's water.
Oh, water. Okay, sorry.
Very nice.
Okay, so I have a tattoo. And the reason I got this is it's representative of a verse in the Bible that says, man makes his paths, but the Lord directs his steps. I was someone who struggled heavily with like, what's the right decision? When I was young and it was like, I'd been married for less than a year and it was, hey, you got a job opportunity in Florida and you're newly married. Do you go? And I have a wife now who's looking to me to lead well. And I'm going, I don't have a clue. And I'm not seeing fireworks up in the sky from the Lord that says, you should do this. The door, which I think is funny you said, like people view it as doors. Is it because potentially in the Christian world we say when the Lord opens a door and shuts the door, that we view it as like, if the door's there. Anyways, that's a rabbit trail. But I was thinking, like the door, so to speak, is still open. And I don't know if this is the right decision or not. And then reading in the Bible, I came across, man makes his paths, but the Lord directs his steps. And I just went, I think if the Lord, as long as I'm following the Lord in whatever I'm doing, I think that ultimately he's going to get me wherever I need to be, even if it's not the right decision.
Yeah.
Right? Is that...
And it may not be a wrong decision, meaning it's not a moral issue.
Right.
And I think we tend to make moral issues out of things that aren't moral issues in this regard.
Yeah.
Like you moving to Florida where were you living at the time?
Illinois.
Yeah, see, that's just clearly the right decision. It's
extreme cold to
right.
extreme
You were in
heat
the cold
and
part of Illinois.
I was
too.
in northern Illinois.
Yeah, you were up there in the cold part. So that
cold.
just is obviously a godly decision to go to where it's warmer. No, I mean, I think we just get paralyzed oftentimes attaching right and wrong to things that are God going, hey, just be wise, and do what I've equipped you to do.
Right.
And we tend to, like you mentioned, the kind of Christianese traps we fall into at times. Those matter because people tend to adopt Christianese as their theology, especially if they don't actually read the Bible.
Right.
So there's that coupled with not just the vernacular issues, but the pressure, like the cultural pressure that you get from other people who are compounding that perception that, man, you've got to make sure you make the right decision here. And you brought it up, or the questioner brought it up in regards to a girl.
Yeah.
People tend to think in terms of who's the one, and nobody really ever pauses to think what happens if one person gets that wrong. Like I'm not a math genius, but it seems like it would create a chain reaction, right?
Yeah, major.
So the truth of the matter is there's probably a whole bunch of different people out there that you could marry and that you could have a godly marriage with.
Yeah.
You don't have one person out there that you were just destined for, despite what Hallmark says and despite what Hallmark movies say or whatever. You could probably marry a whole bunch of different people.
Yeah.
And just one.
Yeah, no, I know.
I'm not a proponent of polygamy.
Yeah, I see what you mean there.
Yeah, so but that's one of the areas where people really do get paralyzed is in picking somebody to marry.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, do they love Jesus? Do they check
that's
those
what I was
big boxes?
Say. There's filters that you have to have with that. It's not like, should I marry this person or not? Like, you have to look at the qualities and the characteristics of that person. Like, is there a character? Are they a Christ follower? Like, there are things biblically that you have to make sure that this person lines up with. But if they check those boxes and you're looking for something else, like, what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
That's okay.
And there's a lot of good questions to ask within those parameters.
Yeah.
And I joke all the time about my 2 rules for life. Number 1, don't be dumb.
Yep.
Number 2, don't have sex with anybody that you're not married to.
Great rules.
Those are great rules. They really are great rules.
Yeah.
And there's affirmative ways of saying that, like be wise.
Yes.
Sleep only with the person that you're married to.
Yeah.
So, but I think there's a lot of room for creating a lot of havoc and grief in your life. We're talking about the positive side, but it's possible to do things that are dumb that aren't sinful. So you could make a decision there's nothing moral about it. It's just dumb. Why would you do that? Don't do that. You could marry somebody that, okay, they love Jesus. There's no huge glaring red flag, but man, there's like all these other little flags. Why would you sign yourself up for that? So you need to operate with wisdom. The goal should be wisdom.
Yes.
That's what a mature follower of Jesus gravitates towards is operating with wisdom. Immature people gravitate towards things like Gideon, where we glorify what Gideon did and talk about, like, I'm just going to put out a fleece. God had already told Gideon what to do.
Right.
Gideon had a lack of faith that God was patient with. This is not an example to follow.
Right.
I'm just going to test God.
Yeah.
I don't think that's something we should glorify.
Nope.
No, he had already been told what to do, and he was being borderline disobedient. So again, if we don't pay attention, if we don't read our Bibles, if we don't get godly wisdom and counsel, and that would be another thing I'd point to is when you're trying to make a decision, especially a big one, man, go find the wisest people and bring them into that decision-making process.
You can't isolate.
Shouldn't.
No. Well, you're bringing yourself into a place. And I think the other part of that is bring in wise people. I can't begin to tell you. Let's talk about relationships. The people that you go to, and I think we may have talked about this, or I've listened to this podcast before, not my episode, but others, where it's like, hey, if you're gonna find out who to date, you probably don't need to go to like all your best buds. They're like, oh, dude, she's so pretty, and oh man, she's so cool. You need to go to someone who's married and wise and has a little bit more experience to be able to go, hey,
Yeah.
Have you thought about X, Y, and Z down the line? Because your friends, the people that you surround yourself with in the same stage of life, they're going to think like you do. They're going to think the way that you probably want them to think. I love the idea of like someone had said, I'd heard before, like, hey, maybe bring someone in that you know might actually disagree with you on this.
Right.
Like challenge you on it and see if this is really something that is truthful or is wise, or if it's just like, hey, this is pretty dumb, and then listen to it and see if there's actual value in that.
And then own your decision.
And then own your decision.
Don't put it off on somebody else. Take responsibility for it and the outcomes. In this realm, like in the ministry world, we talk a lot about calling, and we'll say things like, God led me to this place, and all that kind of thing. And it can get really confusing for people because I remember having a conversation with somebody once, because when you ask people a question, well, do you feel called to this place when they're in the middle of an interview process? I told that person, I was like, hey, if you were asking me that, I would say, I don't know. That's what this process is for. Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
I mean, if you want me to play the God card and look at you across the table and go, I'm called here, guys. Like, God told me I'm supposed to be here.
What happens, though, when the other people across the table from you after the interview and who are making that decision go, hey, this isn't the right fit? And the person said, but I feel called.
Right.
Are you then no longer living in your calling and your like? That can get
God's way.
That can get messy really quick.
Well, I had a friend who had a girl come up to him once and say, God told me that we should date, and he's like, well, he didn't tell me.
I missed that memo. Sorry.
So I'll let you know if he tells me that.
Yeah.
So it's not a fair way to play.
No, it's not.
Is really the thing I think people need to hear. Yeah. Don't do that to people. There are processes for figuring out what is the wise thing to do. If God here's the other thing, and I think this is really important. We also we'll poach scriptures like one of my favorite stories, Elijah on Mount Carmel with the gentle whisper. He's up there on a mountain, the wind goes by, the fire goes by, all this chaos goes by, and then in the gentle whisper, God says, what are you doing here, Elijah? So we extrapolate a whole theology of how God communicates to people based on one story in the Old Testament that seems to be pretty unique.
And we're all chasing this whisper now.
Yeah, and all of Elijah's life is unique. Yeah. Like, he's one of the most unique characters in the whole Bible.
Right.
So I'd be real careful to not just extrapolate and go, well, I'm just like Elijah, So here's what I think about the creator of the universe. If he wants to tell you something, he can make sure that you hear it.
Yeah.
Like, he's not, again, trying to hide his voice from you. And especially as New Testament followers of Jesus, we need to be clear, and this is emotionally not satisfying for some people.
Ooh.
But we have the Bible. It is God's word. There's more than enough in the Bible for you to spend the rest of your life and 10 other lifetimes obeying and following if God never whispers a thing in your ear.
Yeah.
So do that. And if God wants to tell you something, he can tell you something. And he has done that historically in the past with some people. But if you're waiting for him to speak with an audible voice or give you some sort of miraculous sign or something like that, the chances are he's probably going, I've already told you what to do.
What are you waiting for, man? I've already said this to you.
Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as though working for the Lord and not for men. I mean, family codes, there's all kinds of stuff in the New Testament we can follow.
There's so much, yeah. And I think, I could be wrong in this, but this is what I've seen in my own experience. And this is where you said previously in your statement of make your decision and own it. I think... I don't want to speak for this entirety of a generation. I don't know if they want to own it. I think they're scared to own it because, and I was talking to one of my friends about this yesterday, of like, you're putting your value in the wrong thing. That if you own it and it's the wrong thing, you're a bad person. No, maybe sometimes it just didn't work out. Yeah. And that's okay.
It's possible.
Learn from it. Let the Lord like speak into that and like, don't let that failure or mess up or whatever it is, like, just be there, learn from it and move on. But you can't be scared to own the decision that you make, because ultimately at the end of the day, like, you're the one who made the decision. Like, I think we're expecting the Lord to come down and like grab our hands and our feet and like say yes or say no so that we can go, well, that was the Lord who did that for me. And you know, it was all him, and you're going, yeah, you got to own your decision. No one made you make that decision. You have to own that.
Right. I mean, in 2006, I moved my wife and 2 babies from here to Colorado.
Yeah.
Stayed till 2017. You know, there were many things about moving to Colorado that came down to, we just want to go do that. Like, we want to be a part of this church. We want to go on an adventure as a young married couple. You know, we didn't get any red lights that would have told us, hey, you know, there's something wrong about going here.
Right.
There was a lot of like, man, there's a lot of right things. Because we knew that, hey, we're not going out there to be drug traffickers. We're going out there to do ministry.
Right. Like,
and if we would have stayed,
decision.
We would have been doing ministry here.
Right.
So I've told people, I don't think that I would have been outside of God's will had I stayed here in Kentucky. I don't know how that would have played out, what would have gone on.
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I know how it played out in Colorado, and I know that that wasn't inconsistent with God's will.
Right.
You know, and coming back here, same thing, you know, now with 4 kids, much older, you know, that kind of thing going. I don't think God's in heaven going, oh, no.
Oh, he went to Colorado.
Geez, now what am I going to do?
Right.
Like he's operating a chessboard and one got, you know, he's messed up the whole thing.
It's like the one person dating the one person for the rest, or the married to the one person. You're like, oh, he selected her? Oh, crap. Well, that screws it up for Scott. Sorry, man.
Exactly right. I just think we don't give God enough credit, and sometimes ourselves, to go, he gave us a brain.
Yes.
And
use it.
He wants us to use it.
Yeah.
You know, so use your brain.
Yeah. So, okay, you brought something up that I think you probably have some good insight into this. You made a big life decision. Some people don't have to make large life decisions in their life. Like I've picked up and moved my family. My wife and I and our 2 kids, I have 0 family in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yep.
I moved my wife away from her huge amount of stability, right? So that was also not just me. It was my family that I was making this decision for, together with her. You made a decision with your wife to move to Colorado. You also made that decision to move back here. What does that process look like for you and Allie to make that big of a decision that's not just going to affect you? Like, for me, I feel like, man, I can make a decision all day long. But I think there is a little bit of play when you bring in kids, you know?
Gosh, yes.
Because that was the thing that when you moved here, I went, man, that's a hard decision to make. And I think that may encapsulate where we need to maybe land the plane with this is, okay, that's a hard decision to make. What did your process look like to get through a hard decision and be okay on whatever the outcome of that was and to own it, so to speak?
Yeah. There's so many things that was way harder about moving back here than moving to Colorado.
Oh.
Moving to Colorado was a pretty easy decision. It was hard, like it was emotionally painful, but it was really exciting. I mean, I was 26 years old, 2 babies that didn't know where we lived, basically.
Right, you know, not as many like child connections.
There's no relationships from their end, really. Like we have pictures of them at like 1-year-old and 2-year-old birthday parties.
Which they have no memories of other than the photos,
Moving back here, 11 years later with 4 kids and 3 of them being much older.
Yes.
They have friends, relationships, you know, deep connection. The church that really the only church they ever knew.
Right.
They had no memory of Southland other than visiting when we came back here, that kind of thing. It was so much more difficult, like incredibly painful in so many ways, just because of that separation that was potentially on the table. You know, so for us, you know, the thing that I always point people back to is I had kind of come to a place where I was like, hey, how about we just stay here in Colorado and I will just kind of suck it up.
Yeah.
You know, that was kind of the phraseology that I used.
Would that have been easier?
And I think in the short term, it would have been easier because it would have, my theory was, the rest of my family gets to keep everything they know and love. I'll just deal with it, you know? And so my wife looked at me and said, you know, it doesn't work that way. Right. And I knew exactly what she's like. You don't even teach people this. Like, that's not the way this works. Like, if you're not okay, we're not okay.
Take your own advice, man.
Right. So take your own advice, you know? So then it became clear, like, we needed to lean in to this process. And even though it was it was unexpected to move to Colorado. Like I had, and I've talked about this on here before, but I had stepped into high school ministry, which literally was my dream job. Yeah. And I thought I'll do this for 15 years until I'm too old to be a youth guy. And then I'll be a teaching pastor, preacher, or something like that. Sure. So when it became clear, like, hey, being a teaching pastor, preaching was going to be on the table within 2 years of that, it was like, whoa, that is not what I anticipated. But who am I to say, you know? So, but the decision to come back here, that became very, very weighty, very, very fast.
Yeah.
You know? So there are a lot of things we took into account, you know, and I've over the years had, you know, plenty of random churches call from different places and that kind of thing over the years. And I've only entered into a process with another church twice, you know, before I came back to Southland. And so for me, that was always such a weighty thing because wherever we've been, we live there as if that's where we're going to die. You know, great. So
that's a really good way to live too. Because it allows you to actually live without a ton of like barriers up, and you get to thrive where you are.
Put down roots.
That's really smart.
If something else comes along, fine. But the reason we do all kinds of things to protect our hearts, you know. So you'll land somewhere and go, okay, well, we may not be here forever, so let's not develop deep and meaningful connections so that it won't be as painful if we have to go. Well, that, to your point, that's no way to live. You know, so live. And then one of the things about leaving here and leaving Colorado was that they were both relationally painful. But that told us, like, we lived, like we had relationships, you know? So it's better to be that way than the other way around, where you're always looking for the next thing and you're bouncing around like crazy and you never put down roots and you don't establish meaningful connection. You know, just live wherever you are. And then, you know, if you want to do something different one day and, you know, opportunities come along, and you get to run those through the process as well. But I'm circling a bunch of different ways to answer your question. We had to consider things like, okay, where are we taking our kids to potentially? What will the community look like for them? How does that fit who they are? You know, how God's wired them to be. For us, we're going, hey, at least it's a place we love and we know. We've got previous relationships and some that we maintained while we were gone. We've got family, you know, all that kind of thing. So there were some real advantages that made us go, okay, this could be an easier transition than if we just dropped into somewhere we didn't know.
2 questions. One, did you have a circle that you reached out to make this decision? Obviously, Allie was a part of that decision making, but like, you know, we talk about the surrounding yourself with wise people. Like, how beneficial was that making that big of a decision?
Yeah. The reason I say own it is because nobody that you consult with is perfect. You know, so don't offload your responsibility onto somebody else's shoulders just because they're maybe older or wiser. They have a perspective and they can bring it, but then you have to make the decision. So I had a handful of very trusted people, but not all of them were unbiased in their perspective. You know, so I have to keep into account, like, what's their bias in this situation. You know, so I've talked about my friend Vinny a lot. Like, one of the cool things about him is I've seen him grow in wisdom so much over the years. He's become one of the most wise counselors I have in my life. So even though it was painful for him to see me go, like, he was one of the people going, I think you need to do this. You know, so that was a huge thing for me to go, dude, shut up. You know, it's like, hey, man, don't.
No, tell me the opposite.
Don't say that, you know. But the fact that he would say that was further evidence to me that this was a wise decision, because he's a wise man, you know. So I had several people like that. There's been some things along the way with different older, wiser men where they were incorrect, you know, or by my estimation, they were incorrect. But that's why it's my responsibility to make a decision for my life, not theirs. You know, I love them, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do everything they tell me to do.
And that may play into last, and then I'm done because I'm just so curious. But what do you do after you've made the decision and you've owned it, and maybe it didn't work out? Or maybe you come to Lexington, you come to Kentucky, and all of a sudden, this is hard.
Southland's like, hey, we don't really like you anymore.
Well, not even that, but like, it gets hard. Like, it gets hard enough that you're going, oh man, was this the right decision? What should I have done? Like, what do you do with that? Because that may be people who like play it forward, so to speak. They may not make a decision because what if? You should totally know that day's coming. That will happen. So, I mean, man, when I got out to Colorado, it was
it was culture shock in so many different ways.
Yeah.
The church staff that I joined, they had all been through just some really difficult things together. And then here come a couple of these Kentucky guys that weren't there for that and were the bosses. And, you know, I mean, it was a tough situation.
Yeah.
And so there were times where I would just sit there and go, I can't believe I moved my family across the country. This is crazy making, you know. There were things that was like, I can't believe I have to coach this or say this or teach this. Like, you don't know that kind of thing. But then on the flip side, too, coming back here, there have been bumps along the way where it's like, holy cow, man, you know. So those moments will come.
Yep.
And don't be afraid of those things. Just lean into those things. Wherever you go, number one, there you are. So there's going to be complexity and problems and sin and all the things that you bring to the table.
100%.
And you're going to be interacting with other people that are the same way. There's no perfect place. And I think a lot of times we think there is.
That's good.
And there's just not, you know. So know there's going to be adversity. Know there's going to be moments where you go, I can't believe I did this. You might even have moments of regret.
Yeah.
That's okay. Here you are.
Yep.
What's the next right thing
What's
to
the
do?
next right thing?
You know? And so I think a lot of times people will, especially if they've moved, if they've gone to something different, they will try to retreat to the familiar.
Yeah.
You know, and so they'll run back, you know, if they can, to whatever is familiar. And so maybe sometimes that's wise, and I'm sure that there are occasions where that is wise. But I think we have to be careful in those situations to make sure that we're not just shying away from something painful that's always an opportunity for growth.
Right.
You know,
you can't be scared of hard.
Yeah. Don't
hard does
you can
not
be scared
mean
all
bad.
you want. Just don't run from it.
Yes.
Be scared and do it anyway.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. I think we just, well, that was really hard, so that must have not been right. No, life is hard. Sometimes you're going to go through hard things, and you can't shy away from that. You have to recognize, this is where I am. It's hard. Yep. Now what?
That's right.
And make that next right step.
That's right. And, you know, there's a lot about this in the Psalms, and we could kind of land here, but, you know, especially Psalm 37 is one of the places that I'll go when I'm in the midst of decision-making time and things like that. But, you know, there's a couple verses in that Psalm about the desires of your heart. God will give you the desires of your heart. Well, you know, prosperity gospel people, we, you know, use that to say, see, he'll give you all the money and health and success. No, if I'm following after Jesus and I'm becoming more like him, then the desires of my heart become consistent with the desires of his heart.
Right.
So that's the path that we want to walk down. And sometimes the desires of his heart are hard, painful and difficult, but they're good. Yeah. But they're good, you know, so lean into those things. And at the same time, if you can look at your life and go, man, I am following Jesus. I am being self-sacrificial. I'm studying the Bible, all that, and I desire to do this. Yeah. Fill in the blank. Doesn't violate any, you know, moral law. It can't violate his sovereign law. Okay, man, go do it. Go do it. Who do you think God is? Do you think he's going, just because you want it, I'm not going to give it to you? You know, no, that's not the kind of father he is. The desires that he gives you oftentimes are consistent with the desires of his heart toward you, you know. So
that's good.
Chase after those things.
Yep.
All right. Good job today, dude.
Thanks, man. That was good.
All right. That wraps up this season of Locker Room, folks. Pay attention to your feed, though, because a bonus episode will be coming through.
I'm really excited about this.
Very soon.
Yeah.
All right. Peace out. See you, people.